The Evil Dead franchise is one of the most famous in the entire horror comedy movie genre. But what caused this kind of rise to fame? Why is their type of gore work more than a lot of other movies? And what makes the humor that is not so typical in a kind of like haha funny jokes humor so funny, especially in Evil Dead 2? We're gonna get into it a little more in just a second. So, the Evil Dead, most of these Evil Dead movies, like especially Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness, the third one, were directed by Sam Raimi. So he's kind of like the one connected to the franchise, and he's the one that everyone knows about and that's famous. They had a remake, Evil Dead 2013, created by someone else, which is probably the worst in the series of the time, but still not bad. And then, of course, right now, Evil Dead Rise has just come out. It's kind of had an effect of bringing back a little bit of what we remember from the old Evil Dead franchises. Although, I do think in the Evil Dead Rise movie, they did try to lean more towards the horror side instead of it being comedic, more comedic like the older films. But we're going to try and deep dive in why even this type of movie works. Like, I feel like in most movies, usually when you see a lot of gore, your first reaction isn't to start laughing, it's to be like, ugh, ugh. So, why does Evil Dead do it? Like, Evil Dead kind of has this way of just like making it funny. Like, when I was watching Evil Dead 1, I just started laughing so much. I couldn't tell you why. It was like so funny. Like I've seen a lot of gore movies before, but for some reason it just was funny. Now Evil Dead 2 actually has like more intentional funny scenes. So if you're laughing at Evil Dead 2, it's not necessarily so crazy. But Evil Dead 1 and a couple others like Evil Dead Rise, we kind of wanted to see why that elicits more of a humorous response. The first assumption that many people make is just like it's so ridiculous that you're just gonna laugh. But I'm pretty sure there's a lot of horror movies that are completely ridiculous that you're not laughing at, that you're just saying this is stupid, or this doesn't work at all, or it's just like, no, why would I be laughing at gore? But Evil Dead takes this in a certain way. Now, if we kind of want to look into this, we gotta look from the beginning, which might of you not know that Evil Dead was funded by another movie called Within the Woods. So this short film was a test to see if this type of genre would work in this franchise, because they didn't really have too much proven success. A lot of the horror movies were coming out. Horror comedy goes back all the way to 1920s, where a short film called Haunted Spooks by Harold Lloyd kind of could take the title as first horror comedy. So there's definitely a lot of history before these Evil Dead franchise in the 1980s. But you don't really remember that movie, do you? Like, I don't even know, I never even heard about that movie before I even looked at it, unless you're an avid movie buff, of course. So, why does Evil Dead stick in your head? Why do things like Shaun of the Dead and other horror comedies that have, like, notable brand name recognition stick in your head? Evil Dead paved its way through its own landscape. So it took a serious horror movie and made it funny. A lot of these horror comedy movies of the past tried to make a horror movie into a comedy movie. And that's not exactly what Evil Dead does. Evil Dead keeps the horror aspect. It's a funny horror movie. Now, it sounds redundant, but I'm going to explain why there's a difference between a horror movie trying to become a comedy and a funny horror movie. When people make horror comedies, they're trying to take scary elements and putting them with intentional comedic effect. It's, with the exception of maybe Evil Dead 2, a lot of the comedic effect that was done was kind of just like intertwined into the horror movie. So it wasn't that they took a time to make a joke in the middle of the movie or just like crack a one-liner. It feels like it's naturally funny instead of baked in. Because a lot of basically all comedy movies setup is they're making the movie to be funny. But the Evil Dead series, except maybe for Evil Dead 2, as I mentioned before, has it just weaved in the horror elements. Like, I thought Evil Dead was a little bit scary, I'm not gonna lie. There was one jump scene that literally destroyed my soul. And the same thing with Evil Dead Rise over the weekend. Now, although Evil Dead Rise did make a mistake and kind of tried to go more intentionally to a horror movie instead of and having just like a couple comedic elements, it still kind of kept the same thing where they're making a horror movie first instead of a comedy first. And it's strong enough, the comedy, the subtleties that they put into it, that it just becomes extremely funny. Now, this goes kind of towards the Evil Dead Rise, why it's doing so well, even though it's kind of similar to what has been done before. There are a lot of gore horror movies. There's a lot of gore horror movies. There's a lot of horror comedy movies. But for some reason, the way that Evil Dead portrays their gore becomes funny. Like, I don't want to spoil anything from Evil Dead Rise, but there's certain scenes that are like really gross, but you just like laugh. And these are these subtle things that they put in to kind of change it from like a this is super terrifying kind of feel to like this is very amusing. And the subtleties of the change, it's kind of like when someone is making a joke and has a different inflection of voice. So an example kind of is like, look at these inflections between these two statements that are the exact same statement. You're an idiot. Holy crap. Oh my gosh. In comparison to, you're an idiot. Holy crap. Oh my gosh. Like, do you see it's the same statement but done in a way that is kind of different, and that's how it feels for the Evil Dead franchise. They do similar things, but it's just different things that they change, the things that make it just ridiculous enough but not stupid ridiculous, even though some of it is, that makes it funny and just makes it still impactful as a horror movie. This is why a lot of people say that there are no bad Evil Dead movies, because it's just the way that they do this is just done in a way that's so masterfully done. It takes a lot of like fine tuning, because this is something that if you just push a little bit too much, then it becomes stupid and ridiculous and boring and like oh, this is so stupid, I don't know why I'm watching this. Or it becomes too much like a comedy, or it becomes just too sinister, like Sinister the movie. But it's just done in that. This is why it's a legendary franchise that will never be forgotten. And right now with Evil Dead Rise, even though they took a step down, it's still strong enough that I feel like they could probably still make sequels and I would still watch them. Because Evil Dead Rise was like 7.5. And yeah, the originals are higher, but like the fact that it's still like horror and comedy are both like two of the weakest genres. So to make a horror comedy combining the two weakest genres and being very successful is a feat. Like, it literally is like so difficult to accomplish in comparison to other genres. So I want to know what you think about the Evil Dead franchise in the comments. And if you want to watch more horror comedy movies that are more comedic, I suggest you check my review on Renfield, because Renfield looked like it was going to be an absolute flop. But I detail in this movie review what are the good qualities of it and why you probably should give it a second look, even though it doesn't look as great. But I'll see you in the next one.